Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Marianne Birch. Welcome to BirchBark Foundation's education webinars. We are very excited tonight to have the topic of do I need pet insurance? And I think this is a really common question that we get. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Dr. Julie Smith is going to tell us about her experience and recommendation and stories around pet insurance. Her background is very conducive to helping us understand the values of that. So I'm looking forward to our presentation. For those of you who are not familiar with BirchBark Foundation, we are a now 10-year-old nonprofit who works to help save lives of pets who have critical life-threatening illnesses and their owners cannot afford the care. We work with our partner veterinarians to achieve that. We also have pet loss support. We have licensed counselors available to talk to people about the journey of losing their pet. And then our third program is the education webinars, trying to help each pet owner be a better advocate for their pet and understand and work with what can go wrong so that they can have the happiest, healthy pet in their life. We also have some exciting news that BirchBark has a physical office. This is new this year. And so those of you who want to potentially stop by, we're on the frontage road in SoCal on 9029 SoCal Avenue, Suite F in Santa Cruz. We actually have an open house this Saturday from 12 to 4 if anyone wants to drop by and learn a little bit more. We have a pet photographer that can take photos of your dog and a few other fun games during that time, as well as some libations donated by local organizations. So please look on the website and come by and join us if you have time on Saturday. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Julie Smith, who's going to give you a little bit about her background and help us understand the value of pet insurance. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Birch. I'm going to start to share my screen and hopefully it works. It's always fun to do those kinds of things and have technology disasters. But we'll see if that works out. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for attending this really, I think, important topic as far as pet insurance. And just a little bit about my background. So I am a veterinary surgeon by training. Did my veterinary school up at UC Davis. I'm a California native and ended up training in the Southeast for surgery, and then came back and worked in a practice here in Northern California, in a little bit to the north of you all, and Dr. Birch, called Sage Veterinary Centers. And so I was a practicing surgeon for a while and then decided that I could maybe help the business a little bit more, and went back and got an MBA and ended up being one of the managing partners of that practice, as well as their medical director. So kind of knowing the business of veterinary medicine has always been interesting for me. I serve as the chair now of the AVMA's, our American Veterinary Medical Association's veterinary strategy or veterinary economic strategy committee. So it's something that I've always been interested in the interplay of how we can provide veterinary medicine when we know that most of the time it is paid for out of the pockets of clients. And sometimes that can cause some challenges. And here's where the topic of pet insurance can really come to play. Now, I've retired from that practice and I do a lot of what Dr. Birch does now. We have a nonprofit that's a little bit to the north that serves the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area called Sage Compassion for Animals. And we also help pets get the care they need when their pet families can't afford it, when they're in acute medical crisis. We have not been around as long as BirchBark has. So we're a baby. We started during COVID, which was exciting to say the least. But we've been happy to help over 200 animals in our three short years, totaling over $500,000 for grants. So definitely there's a need. And I'm here to talk about pet insurance because one of the things we'd like to focus on is for people to be an advocate for their pet. from the medical perspective. And oftentimes as veterinarians and as clients, we're trying to talk about the medicine and what might be best for your client, or excuse me, your pet, when they are having an illness or were injured. And we end up spending a lot of time on the financial part. And most of the time we'd really want to be focused on the medicine. And so we're going to talk about pet insurance and how that can maybe change that conversation. So the agenda is, and the title of the talk is Pet Insurance, Do I Really Need It? The reason I title the talk this is because it's a question that I've gotten from my friends and family for 30 years that I've been in the industry, and the question hasn't really changed much. And that's a problem in our space. And we'll talk about why some of those barriers exist. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we all have insurance. What is insurance for? And then, of course, how that relates to the costs of veterinary medical care, as well as the cost of the insurance itself. And then finally, I'll walk through some steps to think about when you're evaluating pet insurance plans, because there's now a few to choose from. And it can be confusing because basically all insurance is fairly confusing to figure out. So we know that there's barriers to pet insurance in our country because not very many people have it. And this data is really very new. It's up-to-date numbers as of last year, 2022. Only 3.2% of Americans have pet insurance, and actually 18.6 of those are in California. So we do have a very skewed look here in California, which is good for us. And what's interesting is, and you may see in the media that, people are buying pet insurance more and more, and it's up 20%. Well, it's up 20%, but it's because it was super low. It was only 2.5% of Americans had it the year before. So we're making tiny, tiny inroads, but that number hasn't changed really that much over the last, as I said, 30 years that I've been in the industry. And you can compare that to other countries. The UK and Sweden both has a huge percentage of people with pet insurance. And we're not sure if that is because of the difference in our human healthcare systems. If people are more prone to get insurance for because they get it for free in those countries when they pay their taxes, and we of course do not. So those are that's problematic. We also know that part of the barriers exist because the original companies that were selling pet insurance in our country were not good. I'm just going to say that. They're not around anymore, so we can say that for sure. But really, it was thought of initially to be expensive. And it really wasn't expensive per se at the dollar amount. And we'll talk about what those dollar amounts are. But it was because it didn't really provide value. It had really poor customer service, denied claims quite a bit. The coverage was super unclear. And really the biggest problem was that what this company did was reimburse based on the condition that the animal had or the illness that the animal had. And it was based on the average cost for somebody to pay for that across the country. So you can just imagine if you're sitting in California when costs are a lot higher and it's an average cost, you aren't getting your full reimbursement. And also there's if you're talking about something like a surgical case, sometimes in surgery as specialists, we know different techniques that tend to be somewhat more expensive, but maybe are better for the pet. Well, the insurance company only reimbursed for the average consumer payment of those surgeries. So it just didn't reimburse at the level that was necessary. We also have, I think, a kind of a I don't know if it's a leftover way we think about pets, but I know when I was growing up, or even my parents growing up, people didn't remember taking their pets to the vet a lot. They would take them when they were sick, when they were old, and that was about it. So nobody really thought that there was stuff going on for pets to even need to have a lot of veterinary care other than preventative care. But as we know, animals are mortal, so an illness or an accident will happen at least once in all pets' lives. And when we think about insurance in general, there's a few reasons why we get insurance in this country in particular, it can be required by law. So if you need to have insurance on your car because it's required by law. It can be required by a lender, such as a mortgage company can require you to get insurance for your home. Beyond that, really the reason why we get insurance as people, as Americans, is when a financial loss would be beyond what we could afford to pay or recover from easily. Probably a good example is travel insurance, especially now after a pandemic. A lot of people are getting travel insurance because if they put out $3,000 for a trip, they'll pay $200 for the insurance to make sure that they get that money back. That makes perfect sense. Well, a lot of times when people ask me, should I get pet insurance? They also will say, well, I know veterinary care is expensive. Well, if you know veterinary care is expensive, why are you asking if you should get pet insurance? So it's a little bit of a paradox still. And I will say that one of the things that has come to light in the last few years is a metric we call financial fragility. And what that means is there's a certain percentage of people that can't afford to fund an unexpected event. And the question that was actually asked in 2022 or 2021 was of Americans, could you, if you needed to, come up with $2,000 to pay for something that was totally unexpected? And only 67.5% of Americans can do that. And that's about the cost of a trip to an emergency clinic if you need to, if you're lucky. So, it's a real problem having to come up with that amount of money for some Americans. And that's across a lot of income levels. That's not just low income individuals that have that problem. This is actually up to even people who are making $200,000 a year. They found that some people had financial fragility. So we know that that veterinary care would fall into that third category. The issue is trying to figure out that financial loss. And this is where I think some of the barrier to pet insurance comes from in our space. It's easy to know the cost of things. So again, your travel insurance, how much you paid for that trip. If you pay $200 in insurance, it's probably a good deal. If you buy something online from Amazon and it's super expensive and you want to add a little insurance to make sure it gets to you, that makes perfect sense. But it's really hard with services, especially when it's being provided at different types of service that's being provided, or the different providers can cause different differences in costs. And then, of course, how much you value the service actually also comes to play. And this is where some of the murkiness around veterinary medical services comes into play, and I think serves as some of the confusion around should I or should I not buy pet insurance? Because there really isn't a general expectation of cost. And we know this because we've asked people. There's surveys out there. Some of them are recent and some of them are a few years old, but they'll ask people, how much do you think you need to pay for veterinary care? And one survey showed that just under a half of the people surveyed, they had no idea how much, and they were not prepared for being able to pay for veterinary care. And they undervalued what the actual pricing was. And I think one example was in dentistry. And again, these are national averages, so the costs are probably a lot higher here in California when I say this. But the average American, when asked how much they should pay for or thought they should pay for a dental for their dog, they thought it might be around $100 to $200. Well, the actual cost is closer to $500 or even higher. So we're just not prepared for it. And part of that is because there is no standard pricing within our industry. That being said, that's the same in most industries, that you can't price share to try to monopolize pricing. But it is I think, really more of a problem around the level of service offering, because it's not obvious to you as a client or a consumer of what you're getting in veterinary medicine services. And we haven't historically, as veterinarians, given you a very good guide around that. And when I talk about level of service, there's a variety of different different business models as well as different just levels of service within our industry. And I'm not saying there's good veterinarians or bad veterinarians. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is, for instance, you will have a community clinic that's designed for maybe spay and neuters, minor surgery procedures for people with low income in the community. That's a different level of service than, say, there's a couple of chains now that are focused in primary care that are in Walmarts or in PetSmarts, such as Banfield or Thrive. Those are primary care veterinarians, but they're really, really designed around wellness and preventative care. They don't have a lot of the equipment or the diagnostics that you might need for more significant illnesses. But again, they're not really marketed for that. And then you have primary care practices that may even have extended hours, or some of their veterinarians go in for more training or certification. And so they may have higher pricing. But again, it's not as clear for you. And then finally, there's specialists like myself and Dr. Birch who have years of extra training and expertise in very certain areas of veterinary medicine that are also going to come with a slightly higher price tag, as well as emergency care, which is 24/7. And you have staffing that you have to do overnight, which is going to come with a higher price tag. So some of it makes sense, but a lot of it is very fuzzy and unclear. And so some of this will contribute to the fact that we're just not sure about how much veterinary medicine costs. We're also, as I said, very bad at explaining our pricing. For years, what we said as veterinarians is you should take your dog every year to the veterinarian for its vaccines. But of course, now we know you get vaccines online or at the feed store. What we really should have been saying all this time is you should have a veterinarian examine your dog every year so that they can make sure that it's healthy, that you get your questions answered around nutrition, exercise, any breed-specific problems that might be coming up. All of that should be talked about with your veterinarian on an annual basis to make sure that your pet stays healthy. So again, we've muddied those waters. And the final muddy is the media. We love the media. Yes, they get a bad rap these days. But one of my favorite books and one of my favorite TV shows was All Creatures Great and Small. It was very popular. It still is popular, especially the new one. But again, those veterinarians are hometown veterinarians in the 40s, and they're not doing the level of care that we're used to. And I'm going to put on a little bit of a soapbox here around the incredible Dr. Paul. It was one of the most popular shows on Animal Planet for years and years and years. That gentleman has been brought up on malpractice on more than one occasion, and the AVMA has actually sanctioned him. And so if everybody's thinking that that's the standard of care, it's actually very much not the standard of care, even from a legal perspective. So again, the media is not helping with that. And finally, only about half of Americans have pets. And so that means there's half the people out there that don't enjoy the human-animal bond as much as some of you here on the call. And every once in a while, we might have a friend or a family member just question what we're spending on our pet, because it's just an animal. And so all of these things contribute to this murkiness of how much should we be paying for veterinary medicine that it hinders this barrier to pet insurance. So let's try to diffuse some of that right now. How much should you expect to pay? Well, for years and years, we've been asking survey data of just Americans. How much do you spend each year on your pet? Some of those numbers, you can Google them. They're a little bit murky because you're not quite sure what the spend is on. Is it veterinary care? Does it include grooming, toys, food? Food is a huge spend right now in the pet space. So it's a little bit inaccurate. And again, it depends on what part of the country you're in. We're starting to get more data from pet insurance claims. So for the people who do have pet insurance, we're seeing how much they're spending. And what's interesting about this data is what we see is that people who have pet insurance will spend more money on their pets. Veterinary care. So 29% for dogs, 81% more for cats. And so what this means is even the people who do love their pets and have a big enough human animal bond with their pets that they're going out and buying pet insurance still have a financial factor in their brain when they're deciding about what to spend on veterinary care. Pet insurance alleviates that. So that's why we're seeing more of a spend there. Now, I don't know if you all are using the chat function to talk at all, but it'd be interesting for me to know. I'm going to show you some numbers here about what the actual costs of veterinary care are. And I want to know how many of you might be surprised by that. So the top box is about is data that's coming from a third-party lender called CareCredit. So these, again, are biased. These are people that have gone out and used CareCredit to help pay for their veterinary care. So you can see the first box is average lifetime cost of veterinary care. So this is purely veterinary care. And this data is about 4 years old now. So pre-pandemic data. So let's just be clear that we know that veterinary costs went up remarkably during the pandemic. So it's going to be higher than that right now. And then if you look at the lifetime cost of total care, which just came out a little bit more recently, that includes everything. So again, groomers, food, veterinary care, the cat condo that you made in your backyard, all of that's included in there. So that's a very wide range. And also for dogs, size matters. You will pay more in veterinary care for a larger pet than you would a smaller dog. Cats are about the same size, so hence the one number there. So that data is pretty real, that financial data, again, with some biases. If you look at the data below it, this is the cost of insurance. So when we look at this data, this comes out of the National Association for Pet Insurance Companies. So they combine this data every year. And this is 2022 data. So this is very recent. And if you look at the average premiums, and again, these are averages, and we'll talk about the different plans expenses and what causes them to be higher or lower in a second. So dogs a little over $50, cats a little over $30. Compare that to another statistic I love. Now you guys are finding out I love data. The average spend for an American on streaming services every month is $200. So your average American will not have a problem spending $200 on streaming services every month, but question if they need pet insurance. And so this is why getting this data and getting these numbers is so important, that we can talk through this. And so you can see I've just multiplied through what that would look like as an annual premium. And then for the lifetime of a pet, I chose 15 years because I think that's a reasonable lifetime. We are seeing pets age more and more, just like we are in humans, because of, again, advanced veterinary care. So you can see that those numbers are comparable or even less than what you're seeing. In fact, as I said, the average lifetime cost of veterinary care data up there is older. So it's definitely, from a mathematical perspective, worth pet insurance. So let's talk about the plans themselves. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk through some generalities of what to think about and how to look at plans. And my goal is to try to get you, the least amount of monthly premium costs, because that's what's, every month you have to pay. Some of these other things that can be budgeted for or are more variable. So we're going to walk through this, and again, with the goal of trying to see how we can minimize your costs of your plan, but still get the best plan possible. And we do recommend that you basically save money for predictable expenses and really use that insurance for those unpredictable expenses, like I said, the measurement of financial fragility. If you can't come up with those unexpected expenses, you want to have insurance for them. And wellness and preventative care are predictable, and you should probably budget for that. Now, you can buy plans that include wellness and routine care, and that's fine if that's what you'd like. You will pay more for them. And many veterinarians offer wellness plans or bundles, especially, you want a long-term relationship with your primary care vet. So they're going to incentivize that by offering you bundles to help take care of those wellness and preventative visits. And in fact, there's some really creative ones that are coming out now, where there's some groups that are doing a monthly fee. And with that monthly fee, you get unlimited examinations, or an app that you can chat with the veterinarian on. So there's a lot of different options for getting your wellness and preventative care at a reasonable cost. The other thing is that pet insurances, remember, can be used at any veterinary clinic. I think it's less fuzzy now than it was a few years ago, but certain groups would kind of sell what were really more like wellness plans, and sell it as more of insurance. And just remember that if you're buying pet insurance, it should be directly, right now, it's directly from the company. Sometimes now you'll find it being offered by your employer, so you should ask. But anything that you're purchasing directly with the veterinary office really only works at that veterinary office. So you do want something that works at all veterinary offices in case you end up at the emergency clinic. So we'll talk about some traditional insurance terms, such as coverage. This is what the policy is going to reimburse you for. And the most common type, and what we're recommending, is the accident and illness coverage. So that really, again, is focused on those unexpected events. And in there, you'll see a little blurb that says covered conditions and exclusions. Your exclusions should be very little. So the best plans don't have many exclusions. They might exclude routine wellness if you're not paying for that part, or again, regular routine dentals, those types of things. So know what's excluded, but again, it should be limited to so those routine things. Sometimes they'll also limit acupuncture and holistic type medicine, but you'll also find some of those plans that do cover that. So just know what is and isn't covered. And most insurers nowadays will actually cover congenital and inherited conditions. They may ask you to pay more for those, depending on the breed of your dog or cat. But be aware that those things can be covered now. Do watch for long waiting periods before the insurance kicks in after you start and trigger the payment. It should only be in the matter of weeks, not months. And so again, the better plans are in that time frame. And then when we talk about benefits, that's the dollar amount the insurance company will pay for a covered incident, as they call it, or during a given time period. And you will see things listed as a per incident benefit, an annual benefit, or a lifetime benefit. And the per incident ones get more confusing, and we'll talk about why they're even more and more confusing when we talk about pre-existing conditions. So the better ones are to get by annual or lifetime. It's just because it's just easier for you to manage and not have to argue with the pet insurance company, which again is the goal here. And the best plans, and this is what really kind of changed the game for pet insurance, the best plans are now offering to reimburse on a percentage of the invoice. So it doesn't matter if you had to go to an emergency clinic at 2 o'clock in the morning and it's more expensive, they will pay 90% of that invoice, or they'll pay 80% of that invoice. So that's what you want to look for. And you don't want to have them pay out on a condition or a diagnosis. Just stay away from those, very far away. Exam fees may or may not be covered. So again, that's something to look at. You can have them covered, or you can but the plan usually is more expensive. So again, do you want to budget for those or not? And the deductible, I think Everybody here knows what a deductible is, but obviously that's the amount that you pay before anything will be reimbursed. And you can get that reset annually, or again, applies to conditions. I really strongly suggest don't have it apply to conditions, because one of the problems is there's sometimes conditions in veterinary medicine that overlap a little. And one is not as clear. Are they completely separate conditions? Are they together? And you just don't want to have to argue that point. And your veterinarian sometimes can't argue that point for you. So it can be quite confusing. And so you do want to choose the highest deductible that you can afford, because that'll lower your monthly premiums. And then you factor in any kind of copay like you do with human medical care, factor that in as part of your budget. So kind of a bottom line is what you want to look for in plans that have unlimited annual benefits, flexible deductibles, and reimburse at least 70%. 80 and 90% is probably the most common. But, again, you choose what makes the most sense for you. Unlimited lifetime or annual benefits will increase the premiums for sure, but it gives you that peace of mind that you're not trying to calculate what's being covered and what's not being covered, and can get, again, tricky. You do want to ask if the company does a general increase in a premium based on age. There are a couple out there that as soon as the pet hits 10, you have a big bump. I know about that. Of course, they're an insurance company, so they're going to increase their premiums every year, just like every other one of them does. But you want to look for anything that has an age rider. And remember that most of the policies out there do reimburse you. So you will have to put some money out and then hopefully get reimbursed. There are some companies that pre-approve now, and some can do it quite quickly. They have the software to do that. Great. And again, it's a great service, but you'll pay more for it. So it just depends, again, what are your resources? So that's kind of the general plan overview. What I want to spend some time on is talking about pre-existing conditions, because this is really the bane of the existence of the pet insurance world. And there's a couple of reasons why it's a problem in the veterinary world as opposed to the human world, because basically you're not covered for pre-existing conditions a lot of times in human medicine either. So why it's a problem in the veterinary world versus the human is the concept of diagnosis and diagnosis codes. In human medicine, if you go to the doctor, they're going to put a code on your medical record. They're going to put a code for what your diagnosis is, whatever test they did. It's all coded, and that's driven by the insurance companies. They determine those codes. We do have diagnosis codes in veterinary medicine, meaning, certain diagnoses have particular codes associated with them, but they're more for the medical record rather than an insurance company is not dictating those. And unfortunately, they're not uniformly accepted as far as usage in veterinary medicine. On top of that, only about half of the veterinarians in our country actually have electronic medical records. So we're a little behind in that regard. And on top of that, whether or not a doctor uses it or not, the most common problem we have is that sometimes we don't actually get to a diagnosis. And I'll give you an example. And this is a very common example, is that say you got your puppy, very cute, very sweet. About a month after you get him, all of a sudden he starts vomiting. And you're like, oh, you're worried, take him to the veterinarian, the emergency veterinarian, like at 5 o'clock on a Sunday. And they said, well, looks kind of, a little dehydrated, but otherwise, looks fine. I don't find anything on physical. We can do a couple things. We can run some blood tests to make sure there's not anything wrong with the liver and kidneys. We can take an x-ray and make sure that there's nothing obstructing the intestines. Or he's looking okay right now. You can just take him home, try a bland diet, see how he does for a couple of days. If he gets worse or just doesn't get better, please bring him back or bring him into your primary care vet. Very common conversation. And decide the dog looks great. looks okay. I'm going to take them home. I'm going to try the bland diet. And it works. Great. Wonderful. But you decide, ooh, I got a little scared there. I'm going to get pet insurance. Great. I'm going to get my pet insurance now. 6 weeks later, your puppy starts vomiting again because it's a puppy. And so you bring back to the emergency clinic and you run through the whole thing. And maybe this time they take an x-ray and do find something that needs surgery to remove. Your pet insurance company is going to say that surgery will not be covered because your dog has a pre-existing condition of vomiting. Because that first visit before you had the pet insurance, nobody knows why your puppy was vomiting. The veterinarian doesn't know. You don't know. The pet insurance company certainly doesn't know. We don't know if it's related to what they're now seeing in the x-ray because they don't have anything to compare it to. So that is a huge problem with things like gas, as I said on the slide, limping. Limping is another biggie. Like you can limp and then you could limp for another reason 3 years later, but nobody knows if it's the same reason or a different reason unless you had a complete diagnostic done. And a lot of times we don't because the dogs, thank goodness, or the cats, usually dogs, the cats don't always get better as quickly on their own as dogs seemingly do. But anyway, things can resolve just like with us. But if we don't have that clear diagnosis, which oftentimes is not there, the insurance company will call it a pre-existing condition because they have no other anything to go on. So that is a problem. But guess what? It's completely solved by buying pet insurance when you get your pet. No more pre-existing conditions. So in conclusion, hopefully I've shared with you some costs of veterinary care and the costs of insurance to show you some of the numbers that are real and that are out there that show that pet insurance makes mathematical sense to get. However, I'll also say that even if you never had to make a claim, what we know is that if you have pet insurance, you can feel safe that you can do whatever you need to do and what's best for your pet in an acute crisis or an illness, and you can make those decisions based on the medical discussions you're having with your veterinarian instead of having to worry about the finances. So if we have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Wow, that was amazing. I was wanting to interrupt and go, really, really amazing, because it's so much wonderful information. And of course, my own experiences. Oh yeah, there was that, there was this, there was, a shunt. I had a dog that got had a shunt, and the insurance company said, oh, the dog showed up for vomiting to the emergency room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2 days before the insurance policy went into place. If that visit to the ER had not happened, this $8,000 shunt surgery repair would have been covered by the policy, but because vomiting can be related to a shunt. And so it's hard to hear that, especially for the owners that are struggling to cover that kind of cost.
Yeah. I had my own cat, same problem with weight loss. And it's, so that's why it's so important to get pet insurance as soon as you can, and consider those diagnostics. Again, it's not because we don't love our pets, but if you had it's human nature. If I have an offer to go home and try a bland diet and it's presented to me as just as good an option of spending $800, why not try the bland diet? Makes perfect sense to me, but it'll end up being a problem for pet insurance companies. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the flip side of that too is, if you run all those diagnostics, I guess you could argue that if you find a definitive diagnosis down the road, are you going to be able to say it was this then and it's this now? Yeah. But then again, that becomes an argue with the insurance company. So yeah. So one of the things I neglected to say at the beginning, and I apologize to the audience, is that the Q&A is available, and certainly please ask your questions. And we have a question. And Julie, great presentation. Thank you. You mentioned you can get vaccines online and have the vet administer them, ? And
well,
people do it. We should say people do it.
Yeah, you cannot legally do it for your own pet. You cannot legally have somebody else do it, except for a veterinarian. And most veterinarians are not going to necessarily administer something that you walk in the door with because they don't know where it's been. So, but I can say that there's a lot of people out there that do it.
Yeah. I think and one of the things that becomes a concern, I think when parvo was at its peak, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, probably 35 years ago, really, people were getting these vaccines. You don't know how hot they got when they were shipped. You don't know how effective they are. So I do think it's a risky business, as they would say.
Right.
But but to answer your question, Marguerite, that people do that. That's part of the goal with the vaccine clinics too. And as we talk about the economics of everything, one of the conversations being had is how these inexpensive vaccine clinics that are for people that are in the low income fields, how much are they biting into a general practice veterinary's economic income? And I think it was last year, JAVMA had an article saying these are people that wouldn't go to a practice otherwise. So there are two separate populations being affected.
Right. And that's where I think too, we're just really bad at saying expertise, like we have it. I don't know if all veterinary medicine has imposter syndrome or whatever we're calling it these days, but it really is going, it's just like with you, Dr. Birch, as an internist, I don't know anything about diabetes because I'm a surgeon, and neither of us know anything about skin diseases. So, we're always going to go to somebody else for that expertise. And we should be talking more about that, because really the cost of veterinary care, and I can tell you the reason it went up during the pandemic, well, some of it was inflation because of the cost of materials, but most of it was the cost of people.
Yeah.
And we forget, and that's another interesting survey, is when people were asked what they thought veterinary technicians did, a vast majority of them thought they just cleaned cages and held animals. And they don't realize that they've gone to school, they've taken board exams themselves. They're the ones that should be taking the blood. I can't take blood. I always have my technicians do that. So, they're running anesthesia. They're very highly trained, and they're part of the team. And so, a lot of the costs went up because the people needed to be paid more to stay in our industry, which is sad.
Yeah. And the unfortunate emotions around it. And I think that you touched on that a little bit in the beginning, and talking about, if I have pet insurance, so often the conversation, especially, as somebody who comes up with BirchBark or Sage for Compassion, where we're looking at the economics being something that that becomes a priority in the whole medical decision making. And so you have your prognosis, your emotional attachment to that pet, the history of your own pet experience. But when the finances put an abrupt stop to that whole conversation, you lose an opportunity to really follow through. Right. And so often now with insurance, when I'll say the gold standard is stereotactic surgery for this nasal tumor. And I had this happen. It's true. Oh, I still have $15,000 left on my annual limit for my insurance. I'll go up to Davis and have them radiate my dog's nose, and that dog is still alive.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's not even, that treatment is curative. It's not even, it's a great treatment, and so that's where, you're thinking about some of the treatments that we can do now they're not exploratory. They're not, experimental. You don't even have to go up to UC Davis now to get some of those things. They're in practices that we worked in within the Bay Area. So, so that's where, and to your point, as soon as you start to bring in the financial discussion, and nobody really wants to talk about it, it's kind of a little taboo thing. Because again, we all do love our pets, and us veterinarians, we get into it because we love animals, but we have to talk about money. And if the focus becomes the money, then sometimes the medicine gets lost by the wayside, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
for both the client and the veterinary team, because they really do want to do their best. And that's where, you're partnering with veterinarians and I'm partnering with veterinarians that are offering discounts to be able to help people. They want to help people, but they also need the money that we can give them to pay their staff.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that I think that the emotional part of the conversation, how much we care, gets diluted because we have to talk about numbers and we have to talk about the cost of things. Right. So, and yeah. There's Rebecca asked a very good question that I think it's going to be great to have your love of statistics answer this question. So a little bit more about can you talk a little bit more about the mathematical proof that insurance is worthwhile? Yeah. The thought has always been that insurance is a for-profit industry and it's profiting off of us taking more than it gives in theory. So the comparison of insurance costs versus life of the pet, it's the question, she says, I'm not sure if that's a fair comparison since the cost over life chart was from data collected by Synchrony, therefore might show a higher than normal spending.
Yeah. Well, Synchrony is a care credit, is not a pet insurance company. So okay. Yeah. So Synchrony is a bank that owns care credit, I think. So there's that is data that they just put out there, had nothing to do with pet insurance. I was the one that compared the two. So and so from the standpoint of what's out there, I mean, part of the problem of why, all insurance companies are for profit for the most part. There's a few out there that, maybe that are in our nonprofit space, handing out nonprofit insurance, but, every company out, that's what insurance companies are for profit. That being said, part of the reason why it is tricky for them to set the premiums is because in human medicine, and I learned this from a insurance person, they have these crazy things. Well, they have them in all insurance called actuary tables. I just, think about a bunch of numbers on a wall. And somehow by using those tables, they can get a really good idea of how to minimize their payouts or what their payouts are going to be, and then kind of set the premiums so that they have that profit. I mean, every company is a for-profit except for us nonprofits, right? So the problem is in veterinary medicine, because of the lack of consistency in diagnoses, to tell you the truth, they have very flawed actuary tables. So they don't have the precision. So one of the problems is that without that, they are guessing a little bit, and they're probably going to hedge their guess up. But if you think about it from the standpoint of what I pay for on a per month basis, and that's why I brought up streaming services, if I wanted to pay for my cat's pet insurance, that's just over $30, I could give up one Starbucks a week. That's $30. So that's where it's like, we have to compare it. When we think about things being expensive, it's because we're comparing it to the value we see in it. And so as pet insurances have gotten better in their customer service and their payouts, hopefully people are seeing the value. But what I can absolutely say, if you're fine paying $5,000 for one emergency visit, which is exactly what it is going to be, we are not exaggerating here in California, that is what it's going to be. A knee surgery now, the surgery that I used to do every day of my life, $10,000. And it'll be great. Your dog will walk again. Your dog can run again. 98% success rate. So it's a great surgery to do, but it's $10,000. So as long as you are fine spending that because you have credit cards and you're fine managing it, that's awesome. But if you're not, pet insurance can save you lots of money. Like again, that $10,000 surgery is now $1,000 for you.
And when you think about if on that table you were paying $600 a year and your dog was 10 when it blew its cruise shit, that's still less than what the $10,000 surgery is.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and again, it's that peace of mind that you just don't have to think about it, which is really, because I mean, I can just tell you a case. We have a couple minutes. a case that we assisted with up in the Redwood City area that was hit by a car, tragic, hit by a car. And, the dog came in with head trauma. The dog came in with lung bruising, had front leg fractured, both back legs fractured. Got through the head trauma and the lungs and was doing fine, except for now 3 of the 4 legs are fractured, and badly enough that all 3 needed surgery. That is a $60,000 case. Now, we had the veterinarians all like pooled in and severely discounted the cases. They pulled in money from GoFundMe, from us, from everywhere. That dog's at home now. So everything was fixable on that dog for $60,000.
Yeah.
That's not unusual, unfortunately.
Yeah. A very similar case early in BirchBark's time was a migrating foxtail. And requiring a lung lobe removal, and the dog was a therapy dog for somebody in hospice for pancreatic cancer. Like, the entire story was just so heart-wrenching, and the fact that it was probably $10,000-$15,000, and that's just we can't do too many of those and stay afloat as nonprofits.
No, we can't either.
And yeah, luckily we were able to get a lot of donations to pull that situation through, and I think this speaks to the fact that fixable things insurance can fix when you might not otherwise be capable of doing so.
Right. So, yeah, that dog would have cost the owner $6,000.
Yeah.
So that's why when you were talking about the math and is it worth it, and are we paying insurance companies just to make a profit? They have to make some profit or else they're not going to be around. And I don't think they're gouging us. I think, again, it's harder for them to really nail it. But there are some really inexpensive plans out there. And I know that, from the perspective of other things that we pay for, it's pretty comparable if we're talking about saving a life potentially.
Yeah. And I think another important thing for people to think about is when you get a new pet, ask your veterinarian, do I have a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel and a heart murmur is going to show up in 2 years and I will be able to be covered for all the cardiology help it's going to need?
Yeah. And for those of you who have Frenchies, most popular breed in America, you better get pet insurance.
Yeah. Yes. And just as we were talking about, I have a family member with a dachshund. I said, better get pet insurance. And it was interesting. This, my family member found it on, bundled it with his renter's insurance. So there's companies out there. And another thing I think it's important, especially as the tech industry rises, that a lot of the industry companies where they would pay for childcare or some of the benefits for a human child, now companies are being asked to put a similar contribution towards insurance for dogs and cats, for pets.
Yeah, absolutely. Ask your employer for it, for sure. And I think from the standpoint of, we are going to see better and better products, and we're going to see some bundling out there. Hopefully as time goes on. But again, we are in a bubble here in California in a number of ways, but we are seeing much more high levels of pet insurance here than there's states that nobody has pet insurance. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe because the cost is so significantly higher here, and we have that spectrum, as right. You beautifully described, between the shot clinic to the 24-hour specialty-laden hospital, and those are huge discrepancies in cost.
Right. Yeah, and for those of you, I had on my slide at some point, and you might have noted it down on the Sage Compassion for Animals website on our resources page. I can type it in the chat. We have some other resources on there's a couple of websites out there that are agnostic for, I don't know if I can type in there now. Anyway, so it's www.sagec4a.org/resources. And there's some good websites that allow you to compare some plans that aren't trying to sell you pet insurance. So we have those on there. And then there's some tips. This webinar is going to be on there. I think Dr. Birch is going to make this the slides available to you as well. But hopefully, again, it gives you some tips to, again, try to keep those monthly premiums low. If you don't need them, that's great. So keep them low, but have them for that disaster so that you can, if your husky gets hit by a car like this one did, you don't even have to think about it. Yes, it's all fixable. So let's fix it.
Yeah. Can you do the website one more time? I didn't type fast enough.
Sorry.
No,
www.sagec4a.org.
sagec4a.org. Great. Great. I will send that out for everyone on the Q&A. And it is on the your closing slide as well. And we usually put it on our BirchBark YouTube channel, and then everyone who signed up gets a copy. So
great.
So thank you so much. That was really valuable. I enjoyed it.
No, a pleasure to work with you as always, Dr. Birch, and helping save as many pet families as we can, keeping them together. So happy to do.
Partners in crime and partners in compassion.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your expertise, and all that information was very valuable.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.